My name is Dr. Gad Lavy, and I'm the director of the New England Fertility Institute. I'd like to share with you a conversation I just recently had with a couple who went through the process and successfully and had their baby. So you'll hear about the process, about their struggles, and about, of course, about their happy ending. I just wanted to point out, and when you watch the video, uh, that this all that's happened to them is basically a team effort. If you think of all the different things that happened, how many actually people touched them from the first day they show up at our door until they had the baby. It's really an amazing thing. There's so many pieces that have to come together. There's so many moving parts, and I think along with that, there's also a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety, and the process is not always as smooth as it sounds at first. So our job is myself and my team and the surrogacy agency and the egg donor and the surrogate all come together to help them have their baby. And I just want you to carefully listen. And I think educating yourself and understanding the big picture, and at the same time understanding that all of those small details will be taken care of, and basically allowing you to focus on the important parts of the process. Essentially, picking your egg donor, picking your surrogate, and as much as possible, enjoying the journey.
So start with the with the basically how did you end up deciding that you were ready to have a family and to go with the surrogacy?
Yeah, so way back when Mike and I first met, children was kind of the first thing that we talked about. And right off the bat, we both kind of agreed that we wanted to have children that were biologically related to us, whether it was one of us or both of us. And that's kind of how we got to the twin piece. And we really wanted to have one of each, so we can kind of like watch ourselves grow up and our children together. And then
I think worth noting too, and that is also the cost piece, and like for consideration for parents. I think that working with you, we got a great glimmer of hope that your success rate with twins and a double embryo transfer rather than a singleton transfer. Well, there's obviously risks that are inherent with that. That you were a doctor that was confident and willing to be able to try that with the right carrier.
Yeah, and we went to a bunch of places, and we kind of put our feelers out to a bunch when we first started looking into surrogacy, and we got turned down by a lot of doctors, in New Jersey, who said that twins were completely out of the question. They would never do twins, and so we were really we got really sad, to be totally honest. And then we started working with your office, and twins seemed like totally possible. And we kind of got our hope in the process back, and it kind of motivated us to get back into it and really focus on the surrogacy journey. And that's kind of how we landed on okay, let's do this. We know we can do twins. We found a great fertility doctor who is going to help us and support us in this process. And then we kind of jumped into the surrogacy agency, started working with them. And that's kind of how we just started our journey, was fertility first and then a surrogacy agency.
So you had enough good information before you actually started.
Yeah, and I would say we wish we knew a lot more back then that we know now.
For example, what would that be? One thing that you would.
I think expectations, right? I think you set our expectations up very well, but I think even before we met you, I think understanding just how long the process takes, I think that understanding how much the process costs, I think that understanding the emotional impacts of it, it's a roller coaster. And I think that a lot of people aren't necessarily ready for that roller coaster before they enter into the process. Deciding to have children is a huge decision in and of itself. And then when you start the process, obviously there's so many different bumps in the road that you aren't expecting. It's almost as if you're driving blindfolded, so you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And also, the things like the genetic testing, we had no idea that was going to be a part of it. And so, going into that, what's going to happen? Maybe this will totally blow up and we're not going to be able to have kids because of the genetic testing, or the fertility issues, that we faced. We weren't prepared for those obstacles. And I think when those hit us, we had to kind of like regroup and say, like, okay, this is definitely something we want. Let's figure out the path forward from here and just keep pushing forward. So I think, like Mike said, just the expectation setting, I feel like you're never really prepared for it, but those things we wish we kind of knew beforehand, that they were coming down the line through the process.
I think also too, like, understanding the order of like some of the best ways, right? So starting and finding a great fertility doctor such as yourself to not only educate yourself, find out more about your body, find out what's happening, find out that you are healthy enough to have children, and that you're going to partner with the right egg donor that's going to work genetically for your embryos. I think that that's super important. And that's not anything that we had really thought about or knew about before. You kind of go into the process thinking, oh, it's going to be great. We'll make some embryos and, in just a few short months, we'll have a baby. Clearly not the case.
That's exactly the case.
Yeah. And also the timeline, we honestly, we knew it took 9 months to make a baby, but we also didn't, I guess, like, realize the timing of finding your egg donor and finding your surrogate. And a lot of it is motivated by, you guys, like the couple involved, right? And if you guys aren't, pushing and pressing and looking and really devoting time to it, it could last for 10 years if you let it, So I think understanding that the timeline is really in your hands for a lot of it was a big thing too.
Yeah, because I feel that it's very, very important for people to come into this process, educated enough. Right? You can't really, again, it's very difficult to explain every single thing that might happen.
Yeah.
And I always say that one thing you learn through this process is how to be patient.
Oh yeah.
Because it does take patience, and things don't always work out exactly as you planned. So you have to be a little bit open-minded. But I would say that just with the technology we have today, I think as far as setting expectation, I think most of the time, I'd say the majority of the cases, eventually you walk away with a baby.
Yeah.
Or two.
Yeah. In our case, yeah.
And this is, it's sort of a fairly new thing, right? Because the technology keeps improving. And, we're now at a point, I mean, of course, there's still room for improvement, but we're at a point that's so much better than where we were when we first started. Right. So it's a little easier, right, to be the doctor, because I feel, ultimately it's going to be fine. It's going to work out. In the past, we started IVF, and the success for each try was like 5%.
Wow.
And that was like, I always felt like bad about saying, well, you have to be really, really, really lucky to be successful. And now you do have to be lucky, but just a little bit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even right now, like in the situation that we're in, we still feel very, very lucky to have had twins. And, we know a lot of couples who have went into it wanting twins and weren't so lucky. So we still feel like very, like, we're very appreciative of the whole process that we had to have twins.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and talk a little bit about the egg donor and, what went into that, and, deciding what to look for and finally making.
I mean, I think we so it's so interesting, before we had even met you and we had the opportunity to explore the donors that you and your clinic work with, we had just done some exploring online, had gotten some access to other egg donors, and quickly found that we weren't looking for someone who could help us create the perfect baby, in the sense of like, we weren't looking for this perfect Aryan or like this like perfect, beautiful, woman who was like unrealistic. We really felt as though we were looking for someone who was kind of like ourselves, who had mixed, backgrounds. We wanted to, make sure that there was enough mixing of cultures there. That was important to us. Sort of like the girl next door was important to us, that, she was beautiful, but that she was also talented. And, we found that in our egg donor, her passion for music. She was also smart. She, had a wonderful background, a supportive family. And yet she still had some, hiccups in her past that, made her human. And, I think that that was very important to us. We didn't want someone who was perfect on paper. We also wanted someone who, could really help us create a person that would be someone who could come into this world and improve it, which is really one of the major reasons why we wanted to have children, why we're passionate about having children, is that we're a firm believer that the reason why we wanted to even have children in the first place was to raise two individuals who can help perpetuate good in the world and not anything else. So we were looking for a donor who could help us do that.
Yeah. And we also, we got from her profile that she was adventurous, her pictures, she traveled a lot. And so, we were hoping that that translated into our children, because we're the same way. And we're big travelers and we're very adventurous, as well as, her health background. The profiles give so much information on what her health history was and her family's health history. And so that was really helpful to us, because, that was very important that, there weren't anything crazy in her past, health history that, would be, concerning for our kids that we passed on to them. So that was definitely something that was important. And then also, we were lucky enough, like we mentioned, to meet our egg donor. And so we got a lot of that, it was almost validating to meet her in person.
Yeah.
Because she was adventurous, she was this bubbly person, she was very outgoing. And so we were kind of, after we left, we were like, oh my God, this is great. Like we actually would be friends with her,
Right.
In kind of like real life. And so that was really nice and a good experience for us.
For sure.
Now going back, you did meet her, and I think it was more or less by chance.
Yeah.
Totally by chance. And so I think I was in your office for blood work that day. And she had been there, I think, for also
the
for
egg
blood work.
the egg retrieval was
The egg
that
retrieval
day.
was that day.
Yes.
And one of the nurses said, she snuck into our room and she said, hey, your egg donor's here. Do you want me to ask her if she'll meet you? And so we were nervous, and I think she was very nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all agreed to it, and we got to sit down for what, 30 minutes?
It's like 30 or 40 minutes. But I think that was the greatest part, is that the conversation, like you alluded to, like it felt like she could have been our friend. Like we were out to coffee. Like it was, we all got along very well, and we had a lot of very similar interests. And we found out that, some of our backgrounds were the same in terms of like traditional things and things that we enjoy and like with our family. So like George mentioned, we felt reassured that this was absolutely the right choice, and that, it's not just someone on paper who looks good, but it is someone who in person is great as well. So I think what I would say to someone who doesn't have the luxury of meeting their egg donor, trust the profile and trust your instincts, work together with your partner, or if you are, going into this journey as a single parent, trust your instincts that you're making the right decision.
And just to add to that, I think being open-minded going into the profiles, you might have in your head exactly what you're looking for, but that might not be in the profiles, right? Like there's only so many women that are in there. So I think keeping an open mind, and like we didn't know if we wanted a brunette or a blonde or a ginger or anything.
Yeah.
So we just kind of went into it with like, let's just like look at everyone, and kind of go into it very open. And I think that really helped us when we were looking.
But I mean, if knowing what you know now, if you had to do it again, would you actually look for a donor who's willing to meet you or willing to talk to you before you made your choice? How important was that?
I think on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it was probably a 5. I think that it wasn't make or break. I think it's a nice luxury to have. Yeah. I don't think it's a necessity. We
probably still would have chose her.
I would have chosen. Yeah, we still would have chosen
forward.
her. I think it was a very, very nice luxury to have. I don't think that intended parents should look for that exclusively in their egg donor. I think, like I had mentioned, like they should really trust the process, trust their instincts, and look for the profile that most resonates with them. And, unless, of course, it's important for that individual and for those intended parents or parent to have a relationship with that person, then for sure they can certainly do it. But I'm sure you can agree that that's far and few between.
Yeah, I think I would say that most parents do not want to have a relationship with their egg donor.
Right.
Most parents actually do and would like to have a relationship with their surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about that in a second. But some people want to get that final confirmation, meeting with her in person or on video or on the phone. And some people actually, all they want is some kind of a way to connect with her down the road. Maybe, if the child is interested in knowing who the biological mother was. So this is a very, very complicated issue now, and of course there's no right answer. I think there's everybody who comes into this has their own idea,
right?
And the same is true for the donors, right?
Sure.
Some of the donors have no interest, or actually very much prefer not to know the parents and just do the egg donation and basically never have any contact. But the reality is that the way the world we live in now, it's very difficult to stay anonymous, right? Completely.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually make sure the donors also are aware of that, because nowadays with Google, I mean, you can find pretty much anyone with DNA testing, 23andMe and all of that.
Yep.
Right.
So so it's become a very gray area, what the difference between known and anonymous donation.
For sure.
Right. So now a few words about the surrogacy process.
Mm-hmm.
The working with an agency and working with a surrogate and the relationships and so forth.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So we worked with a agency to help find our surrogate. Eventually, we did find our surrogate, and we love her. We think that we know that we have a great relationship with her. It just so happens that our surrogate does have a husband and several children of their own, and everyone is super supportive of her, of our process.
We were able to fly out to her hometown, and we did a photo shoot with her and her husband, and it was great. It was like a maternity shoot for all of us. Yeah. We got to meet some of her family, and it was really nice. And like you said, like we have a great relationship with her. We adore her. We think that what she did for us is the most selfless thing one human could do for another. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of our experience. We're on a texting basis. We're connecting on social media.
Yeah.
So she can watch our kids kind of grow up from afar. And we really having a good relationship with her as well as her family, but especially her, was really important to us, so that if our children ever wanted to, find out who the person that brought them into the world was, they could reach out to her, and it wouldn't be awkward. She would already, kind of know who they were, and we'd already have a great relationship. So we wanted to try and keep it as positive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I find, and I just want to get your perspective, is that the parents, obviously coming into this, speaking of expectations or not knowing how the process will unfold, are very anxious about the surrogacy part.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that we were kind of, I think, the most surprised about, was how the surrogacy process, there's a lot of trust involved with a complete stranger. And it takes a lot to trust someone with creating your child and making sure they're not drinking alcohol or drinking coffee or smoking, and there's all these things that we don't have a camera in her house, we can't see.
Right.
You're just trusting the person. And then you throw the pandemic on top of that. And so, we had our child, in the middle of the
Yes.
pandemic.
Yes.
And so there's masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines.
Different states, different rules.
Going to, say, a concert. And if your surrogate wants to go to a concert, who are you to tell them not to go? And there's like those little decisions that need to be made. And you kind of choose your battles. And, lucky for us, like our surrogate was really great. And she was really conscious of what she was doing 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, and she did offer a lot of like, would we like her to provide us a food log every single day? Would we like her, how often would she, should she be checking in with us? And we were very, casual, we were relaxed with it because we also understood, number one, we didn't want to put undue stress on her, our babies, or her family. We wanted her to feel as comfortable in the process as possible. Our surrogate we had the luxury of having a carrier who had carried before as a gestational carrier. So she was a little bit more familiar. She was more comfortable in the relationship. Her last intended parents were a little bit more strict helicopter parents, if you will.
We're very laid back in our surrogacy process.
Yeah, so she really knew how to manage that relationship. So I would say, like, to other intended parents, I understand that it is difficult to come by a gestational carrier. It is not easy. You are on a waiting list for a very long time, and that can be frustrating. But I do think that the ability to work with a carrier who has had the experience before is invaluable, because that woman has had that experience before. She knows a little bit better how to manage that relationship. She understands her support system. She understands her body.
She also understands the process too. And, and our surrogate kind of taught us, like, oh, well, now I go for these tests and now I do this and then this happens. And we were like, we had no idea that happened. And it was really helpful.
And she was actually, we had some hiccups with health insurance, and she was actually able to flag some things for us and bring things to our attention that we never would have known, or she never would have known, had she not gone through the process before. So I think the number one message I'd love to give intended parents is, listen, if you find a carrier that you love and you have a great relationship with, go for it. But if you have the ability to have a carrier that has done it before, it really does help in that process.
So do you remember the first time you met her?
Yeah, it was in your office.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, the first time we met her, it's always awkward. We met her and her husband, and her husband's in a peculiar situation, letting his wife do this, and so it was awkward at first. And really, we just started to
wearing masks.
We're wearing masks. Yeah, so it's like very impersonal. And so we kind of just talked, and we explained our reason for wanting to do this, and we really wanted to know what her reason for doing this was, and kind of the motivation for doing it, and obviously at the end of the day, it's we want a baby, we want to pay someone to help us have this baby, and it's a business transaction, but we also wanted someone who had a human reason for wanting to do this. And at the end of the day, she wanted to help a couple make a family, and that, as cheesy as that sounds, we wanted that. We were looking for that in someone, and she had that written in her profile, but we really wanted to hear it from her.
Yeah.
And that was really important. So I remember that vividly.
And I remember too, like, what resonated with us is, like, again, like a lot of the traditions, like we talked about, like, we love our holidays. So, and so does she and her family, and they really enjoyed celebrating, particular holidays and whatnot together. So we were able to, sort of get along on that. And it was great. Like, I think that we all felt very comfortable with each other after, we had that initial meeting and appointment with you.
Yeah. And we got to learn about her family and her family's dynamic, and kind of like how they live their lives day to day, and knowing that she was already a mom who kind of knew what it was like to have kids. It just made us feel more comfortable meeting her and her husband. And I remember leaving that conversation feeling much better about the whole process, and saying, like, okay, like, she seems like a real person. Like, this is nice. Like, we got to actually see it happen in person.
Yeah.
And in fact, our system, our protocol includes that screening day, the clinic day, when the surrogate comes in and the parents come in, and everyone does whatever testing they need to do. But I think that spending time together, and especially if it's done with sort of one of our counselors, just sort of as a moderator, because it is awkward the first
Yep.
time. I think that it's basically priceless, because again, people, and especially in our culture, you say, well, you don't find people like that,
Right.
that do things because it's a good thing to do and to help other people. We meet we all sort of get suspicious.
Right.
Yeah, and we excuse me, we had phone calls with other surrogate candidates in the past, and we would leave the phone call and be like, this person's not for us, and
Yes.
it was upsetting because we're like, we want to find someone, but at the same time we're like, this is just the process, and we have to trust in the process and keep interviewing people until we find the right person. And then that's how we knew we learned what we were looking for based on the people that we kept on talking to. And then when we met our surrogate, she was saying all the things that we wanted her to say, and it wasn't phoned in, and it was just very natural.
For sure.
And I think often it's the role of the agency to basically screen you, basically talk to you and figure out who you are, what you are, and do the same with the surrogate and make sure that they present you someone who's a match, right? A match meaning they're the same temperature.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
For different things. So, but yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes, especially nowadays, actually things have changed since you went through your process, that it's taking longer and longer to find surrogates. People sometimes say, they just pick a surrogate just because she's available, even though they're not 100%.
That'd be terrifying.
Yeah.
At the end, that's one thing that we try to basically identify, tell people in advance. I said, maybe just wait a little bit longer. The right one will come along.
It's definitely not worth just picking the first person that comes just because because you've waited a long time. Like, you're with this person for more than 9 months. It's a long journey, and it's hard to fake a relationship with someone who is carrying your children. So that's why, again, like, we were so happy to find our surrogate because we actually enjoyed her and liked her and had a relationship with her.
Yeah. And I think, so our process from start to finish was almost 3 years. And I think that I understand even now it's potentially even longer. But I think the number one piece of advice that I would give other intended parents is be patient. Like, it will happen. It's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's just when.
And it seems like it's never going to happen,
right?
But it does.
It does.
You just have to ride an emotional roller coaster for X amount of time before it gets there. But it just, don't lose hope. That's what we keep on telling people who reach out to us.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I mean, I think, and again, it's one thing to hear it and another thing to actually internalize it. And because then everyone is, I always tell the parents, it's going to take a while to find a surrogate. And then they're surprised that it's taking a while to find a surrogate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else you want to share? Anything else you think would be helpful for people going through this process?
Oh, I think one thing that was surprising to us was we had always thought that surrogates would live right next to you and that they'd be in the same town or, a state over, and when we quickly realized that it's very normal for your surrogate to live hours away, a flight away, across the country in our case. And so, we were not prepared to have a long distance relationship with our surrogate. And so we quickly had to kind of pivot and say, like, okay, like, we're going to have a pen pal for 9 months who's also carrying our baby. How do we cultivate a relationship with someone, when it comes to, having a baby, over Zooms or over FaceTime or over text. And so we really had to work hard at that and do that on top of just like regular life, like working and spend time with our own family. And, that was a big chunk of our just like brains that had to go into that. And we weren't expecting that at all. I don't think so. Anyone who is looking at surrogates or, starting the surrogacy process, understanding that they may have to dedicate like a large chunk of their, months going into it to working on a relationship that might be long distance.
Yeah.
So
And
just tell us the end, the happy ending, right?
Yeah.
How did it work out at the end?
It was great.
it was wonderful. Like I mean, of course, after all this through the process, and then we have sons that were born 10 weeks early. At the end of the day, we still have twin boys, and who are doing very well, and they're thriving, and they're going to be 4 months old in a few days already. And we are just super grateful to everyone who assisted us through the entire process. I mean, it takes a village to raise children. It also takes a village to go through this process to make one in a lot of instances. And there are so many people, yourself included, that we need to thank. There were so many individuals who helped us along the way. And I think for intended parents, just be grateful, to everyone throughout the entire process. While it's stressful or whatnot, you may lash out or whatever, but I think just remember that everyone is here to help you, and they are helping you through the process. And all of that emotional roller coaster, all that pain, all that anxiety goes away as soon as you hold your babies or baby. It's worth everything. And then you have a whole new set of concerns that comes. But
will never go away. Right?
It will never go away,
and you will never sleep again. But it's great.
You will sleep again, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, it'll be a while. But yeah, I mean, we definitely had a happy ending, and as going through the process, as much as it seems like it's not possible, or like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to swing this? You make it happen. And, we had to hop on a flight from New Jersey to Atlanta to get to El Paso to get to our kids. And it took 10 hours. And we're like, how do we fly home with 2 kids? But we did it. And you make it work because it's what you're here. That's what you wanted. And, and it happens. And looking back, it seems like we're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But in the moment, it seems hard, but looking back, it's totally worth it. And you're so happy at the end.
And I think people underestimate themselves. I think that what you are capable of is far beyond what you think you're actually capable of. So never in a million years did we think we'd be able to bring newborn babies on an airplane
in a pandemic,
get through it during a pandemic, after mask mandates have been lifted, and this whole 9 yards. But we did it. We're here. We can talk about it, and we're just super grateful to be in the position we're in.
Great. So first, I'd like to really thank you for doing this.
Of course.
We're so happy to do it.
I think that, maybe there's too much out there about the technical part of these processes. I mean, there is a lot, but maybe not the important part.
Yeah. And that's what we mentioned before, it was just, there was nothing Googleable. That was just someone's whole journey from start to finish. And that's what we were, we bought books, we talked to people, we just it was just so hard to find the raw, unedited version of the surrogacy process that we were looking for. And, we almost wanted someone to be like, it's going to be hard and it's going to be a long process, but you don't really find that, on the internet or just talking to people. So that's why we were so happy to do this.
I think you and our fertility attorney team, and you and your team were the 2 places that we found solace in the process.
Absolutely.
You and your office were always real with us, and they always help, set our expectations during the entire process, and set us up for success in that. And we were never left without information, while we were seeking it. You and your office and your team, as well as, again, our attorney was super helpful as well. I think understanding all those super complicated parts of the process where there is no data, where there isn't anything that's Googleable, or it's very confusing and you just need someone to help hold your hand and say, it's going to be okay. This is what you can expect. And that's why we were happy to do this today with you, just because we want other parents to understand that it's going to be okay. And that, working with you is a pleasure. And literally, we talk about you
all the time. And it's not, just you, it's the front desk staff, it's the nurses, it's, the
coordinators,
everyone that works there is so helpful and wants to just give you as much information and prepare you as much as possible. And I think you would agree, we learned the most from being in your office and having the email exchanges back and forth, having the Zoom calls with you, and just understanding this is you'd level set with us and tell us what to expect and tell us what could happen, the good and the bad, and that's what helped us kind of get through the process.
Right.
And push
And
forward.
when it wasn't you, it was Shantae like texting us, like even when she wasn't in the office, just to like make sure we're okay. Like, you know, if like we had a bad day or she saw us and she was like, are you guys okay?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's that bedside manner that you don't think that you need when you're going through the process, but that you
need it.
actually need.
You don't know that you need, yes.
Yeah.
And you know, again, of course, I have a wonderful team. I mean, that's not something I can do by myself. And, you know, I'm very lucky to have this sort of people that care. Because, you know, again, you can train people to do whatever task they need to do, but it's very, very difficult to train them to actually be caring and sort of have the emotional capability of helping out.
Yeah, and I think one of our favorite things about your office is walking in and seeing it's like a giant portrait of you with a bunch of babies that you help bring into the world. And we talk about that picture so often. It's probably one of our favorite places in your office.
And Deb, as soon as you
And
walk
Deb,
in,
yeah,
we
she's
love Deb.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But then it's Deb sitting under this giant portrait of you with all these babies, and it's just lovely. And that was one of the things that I know from the first visit we took home with us, and we couldn't talk about that enough.
It's funny because it is, you are a doctor and is a doctor's office, but it never felt clinical. It felt like a home, and it felt so comfortable and safe. And I think that the environment that you provide for your IPs as well as for your carriers is just, and your egg donors, I think it's wonderful, and it makes everyone kind of just take a deep breath, like when you walk in and say like, okay, this is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for saying that.